Force structure is a fantasy. Hey, I am Chuck the Bureaucrat, and this video is aimed at those young officers and enlisted who might be looking for ways to better navigate their military career. Donald Rumsfeld once famously said, "You go to war with the army you have, not the army you want." And that insight has implications for you that go way beyond what you might guess. See, at any point in time, there are at least two armies. The one you have and the one you want. The one you have is the real one. It consists of people and equipment, behaviors and experiences. The one you want exists only on paper. In fact, in some excruciatingly painful situations, it hasn't even been written down. I mean, it's just living in the imagination of some general officer. In fact, that's why I say at least two armies. When I was explaining the economic principle that causes bureaucrats to apply the technique that's commonly called a salami slice, I explained how two equally competent and capable leaders could have radically different visions of what the army should be like. That's part of the reason why there is so much infighting within the Pentagon over what force structure documents say. You know, those MTO and TDA documents that constitute the paper army that we want. But so what? Well, the first thing that's probably going to impact your career on day one, although it may not be immediately obvious, is that there is always a gap between the real army and the paper army. What's more, that paper army is constrained in no way by reality. Want to change all of our musketeers to grenadiers? That is as easy as typing up a memo. You, personally, can get caught in that gap. If the difference between the real army and the paper army says that there's too many people with your MOS, well, then promotion can become difficult. You might be forced to change your MOS, or you might find yourself tasked out to do some pretty unusual assignments. If the gap says that there's not enough people like you, you might find yourself overworked, but the upside is promotion should be pretty easy. The second way that this gap can affect you is through its effect on commanders. Unit commanders are typically judged against the paper army standard for their unit. As a result, it can be completely infeasible for every unit to meet its paper army standard based off the current inventory of people and equipment. Frequently, you will have a situation where the paper army says there should be 10,000 people with a specific MOS, but there's only 7,000 people that are qualified. So you would expect that on average, units would be at 70% fill for this MOS. But in my experience, command teams rarely see this big picture. 2 stars all the way down to captains either assume that there's sufficient inventory to get them to 100%, or if they do recognize this, they just battle away with the other organizations trying to get access to those people. This situation can drive lots of frustration and angst. Now, to a certain extent, the paper army is aspirational. Defenders of this view will argue that the paper army serves as a signal on how decisions should be made about manpower and training, etc. Little secret here. If you have a system that produces 7,000 soldiers a year when it's supposed to be producing 10,000 soldiers, changing the requirement to 12,000 on paper, it's not going to have any effect. But there is one dangerous problem with aspiring to infeasible force structure. Many senior leaders assume that the force structure is attainable in the short term. That is, while they understand that the army they have is not the army they want, they assume that by the time they need the army, they will have the paper version of the army. So exercises, war games, strategy conferences, they all tend to focus on employing the paper army. And when the balloon finally does go up, these senior leaders are rudely awakened to the fact that they should have been using the real Army for all these exercises and planning and strategizing. This often means that the frontline leaders have to make up the difference between what the brass thinks is happening and reality. Oh, and then there is this little thingy about how when we do get into a shooting war, our adversaries are going to exploit the weaknesses built into our force structure design. There is no military genius so brilliant that he can envision a force structure that is impervious to attack. So that aspirational force structure, it's going to have to get changed to something that adapts to the requirements of whatever battlefield we find ourselves on. That's just another reason why you go to war with the army you have, not the army you want. So what does that mean for all of us who have to make what we have right now the best it can be, both ourselves and the people around us? Well, there is no perfect future solution that is coming to save you. The only thing you have is what you have now, and that is why it is so important that you make it the best you possibly can. Now, if you want to see a technique that might help, try this one.